the solidarity with Israel has never been stronger. And Netanyahu and Modi, I think they're cut from the same cloth.
Voting has begun in the world's biggest election in India, where Prime Minister Modi is seeking a third 5-year term. And our guest today is Rana Ayyub, an outspoken and prominent Indian journalist. She's also a global opinions writer at The Washington Post and the author of Gujarat Files, Anatomy of a Cover-Up. And she joins us now from Mumbai. Rana Ayyub, thank you so much for speaking to us on Real Talk Online.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, we appreciate it. Rana, I want to start off with the Indian election. I mean, the Prime Minister Modi just a few days ago was filmed speaking at an election rally, and he referred to Muslims as infiltrators. So I just want to start with your thoughts on that particular moment.
Well, Mohammed, to begin with, I think, I'm used to, and many Indians are used to this kind of provocative, brazen dog whistle against Muslim minorities since his career as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, where during the Gujarat riots in 2002, he had infamously referred to the relief camps where Muslims were staying as child-producing factories. So there were innuendos in the past, there were dog whistles. But this particular speech was so brazen because for the first time, the Prime Minister named Muslims directly, Muslims as the threat, right? He is not, normally his speeches are about the meat eaters, the fish eaters, the infiltrators, the outsiders, the migrants, the Mughals. They're always innuendos. But this time around, he was very direct. And that's what makes it more dangerous because this time there are no innuendos. He is talking to a country of 1.4 billion people, in which there are close to 200 million Muslims who have already been at the receiving end of hate crimes, which have been increasing in India. So when the Prime Minister speaks the language of the average troll or average bigot, it makes it more dangerous. He's referring to, in fact, he says in the speech that the Congress party, the opposition, wants to give your resources, the resources of the majority, to the Muslims. And that's what, in a way, so many of us have been talking about the othering of Muslims. And the criticism that we always get is that Modi is not that person. Modi has not said this. In fact, right now in the speech, he's directly said it. He has said it, and yesterday he gave he reacted to the speech saying, I only said the truth. So I think it's dangerous. It's a dangerous hate speech. It's not a dog whistle, it's a dangerous hate speech.
Right. But if it's as dangerous as how you're framing it, then why do you think Modi's messaging is resonating with so many people?
Well, Modi's message has been resonating for multiple reasons. There are people who he has over the years made them believe that the art of making the majority feel like victims in their own country. And this is not something which is peculiar only to Modi. We know Trump drums up something like this. We know Viktor Orban drums up something like this. When you make the Hindu majority feel like victims in their own country, that their resources are being taken away by the immigrants or the infiltrators or the Muslims. So on one hand, there's massive unemployment. When you are unable to address the unemployment issues and you blame the other, right? It builds a fertile ground for a big section of the community to start believing those myth-making and the lies. The fact that we do not have a robust mainstream media, when a chunk of our mainstream media has been captured, when social media, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp messaging has been captured by right-wing narrative, propaganda, in a situation like this, when a prime minister utters the hate speech, it becomes acceptable. When the prime minister decimates almost every constitutional body, people look the other way because they feel like, oh, it's for the larger good, right? And then months before the election, the prime minister constructs a grand Ram temple over a demolished mosque. He's not pretending anymore. He's not pretending to be the leader of a democracy, in India at least. If you go out, you see all these hoardings with Modi dressed in a ceremonial Hindu cloth with holding a sengol saying, I gave you the temple. People are responding to that.
Is that why certain phrases like Lord Ram has come back are becoming more popular again?
I mean, during the Ram Temple, of course, inauguration, the advertising by the BJP was Ram is back, and you often right. And then you wondered, where did Ram go in this country? It's like you're making it look like Modi got Lord Ram back. Modi got the dignity of Lord Ram back. If you see all his election speeches, it's all that victimhood that he's perpetuating. He's telling people that if Congress comes to power, you will not be able to do your pujas, your worshipping. These people will consider Hindu worshipping as an anti-national act. So look at all his speeches are kind of stoking this victimhood in the majority, making them believe that he is the protector of faith. And if you see, this election is more about the cult of Narendra Modi. I don't think he's fighting an election with anybody. It is a cult of Modi, which is like in a very mystical, he's like this religious figure, God man who's bestowing his blessings on people, and people need to accept him as a leader. If you see all the hoardings in Bombay and across India, it's not about BJP versus, it's not that BJP is fighting election. It's this godman like image of Narendra Modi who is asking for votes in the name of a lot of majoritarian ideas.
I'm going to come back to Modi a bit later in the conversation, but there was one op-ed that you've written in the Washington Post that I wanted to ask you about. Now, the headline was, India's ruling party is using the Israel-Gaza war to demonize Muslims. Now, in this scenario, what parallels are you drawing between the BJP, Israel, and Gaza?
I mean, there's nothing hidden about the fact that the Indian Hindu right wing ideologically is more aligned to Zionism, right? And it is very ironic. For instance,
Hindutva and Zionism, basically.
yes. And on October 7th, the ruling party, the BJP, put out a tweet that said that this was India before 2014, before they came to power. Now, it was a dog whistle that said that, okay, this is Islamic terrorism, and this is what used to happen. And many of the narratives of the ruling party are, go on the line that Netanyahu has done what we should be done in India. Or, Bibi is doing what India needs to eradicate Islamic terrorism. There is no proof of Islamic terrorism. It's something that is being built, but Netanyahu is a figure who Indian right-wing nationalists see as somebody closer to Narendra Modi ideologically. Especially, and it's ironic because this is a country in which Maykov, Hitler's biography, is one of the biggest bestsellers. So the Hindu nationalistic ideas are self-contradictory, but at the crux of it is the idea that Muslims need to be shown their place. And Netanyahu has mastered the art of showing the Muslims, and their understanding of this issue is very simplistic. They don't understand the nuances of it. But for them, Palestinians who are being murdered or killed are Muslims. And that's what endears Netanyahu to them, that they need to be shown their place. And that's exactly the treatment that Indian Muslims need to be shown. So if you see most of the tweets from the IDF or from the Israeli ministers, a lot of the people commenting below and with the hate tweets are a lot of Indian Twitter handles. These are Twitter handles which are cheerleaders of what Israel does to Palestinians. It's not a recent phenomenon. It runs parallel with the Hindu right-wing Hindutva ideology, and the Hindu ideologues have in the past claimed parallels with Nazism, and at the same time admired Israel, admired Zionism. So it's basically, at the crux of it is, I don't think they understand that. What they understand is the supremacy of it. That what Israel is doing is protecting its supremacy, and we need to use the same tactics to maintain Hindu supremacy. And that's what it boils down to.
Right, and that's interesting because, as you know, obviously the two leaders, Modi and Netanyahu, the way they've been framed in the media, especially Western media, is that they have some sort of bromance. But I guess even moving beyond that, you can draw similarities between the two leaders.
Absolutely. These are strong men who are extreme right-wing, who will decimate all institutions, who will decimate anything to stay in power, who will promote the worst of the right-wing tendencies amongst their people. These are people who have mastered the art of cruelty in politics. And I think that's why, in fact, that historically India has been a vocal advocate of the two-state solution. India has historically spoken for Palestinian rights, but with the Modi government in power, the bureaucracy or the foreign minister will go on international platforms and will speak one language, saying, "Oh, India stands with Palestine." But if you scratch the surface, especially during the elections or during or on social media, the solidarity with Israel has never been stronger. And Netanyahu and Modi, I think they're cut from the same cloth.
And with all that in mind, Rana, do you think Kashmir under India one day could face a similar fate to like what we've seen with Gaza under Israel?
I think Kashmir is a slightly different issue. What is happening in
Mm.
Kashmir is, when 370 was revoked in Kashmir, it is a completely different issue for me in the sense that the people there, you don't hear their voices anymore. They have been completely silenced since 2019 when the special powers were revoked. Kashmiris have been invisibilized. You don't see them anymore. The top Kashmiri journalists are arrested under terror charges, under Public Service Act, Public Safety Act. Kashmiri publications have shut down. The ones that exist have become propaganda tools of the government. And to an extent, I think the Indian mainstream media is also responsible for the silencing of Kashmir, because I personally believe that Kashmir has always been seen through the prism of patriotism. I mean, we do not, I mean, we love the land. We love that, we see Kashmir as a land we need to protect to protect India's sovereignty. But we do not extend the same feelings for the people of Kashmir. It's like you need the piece of land, but you don't need those people. And before G20, when before the G20 summit, the Prime Minister invited delegates from all over the world to take a tour of Kashmir to show the normalization of Kashmir. How do you show normalization of an entire population when you cut down the internet? When you do not give them access in the mainstream media, when some of their best human rights activists are behind bars. So I think Kashmir has been effectively silenced. Kashmiri journalism has been silenced. At this point of time, some of Kashmir's best known journalists have their passports impounded by the government. Kashmiri journalist called Sana Mattu was on her way to receive the Pulitzer Prize. She was stopped at the airport and she could not go to receive a Pulitzer. It's brazen. It's brazen. If something like this was to happen in Delhi, the mainstream capital of the country, there would be outrage. But one does not see the same kind of outrage for Kashmir. So effectively, you do not know what the Kashmiri people are thinking right now. Everybody says Kashmir is normal. Prime Minister Modi had a rally in Kashmir, and a lot of people complained that they had been forced to skip their day-to-day life and join the rally. They were forced into the rally. So we don't know. We don't know because the voices that are supposed to speak the Kashmiri truth are absent.
Well, on the personal front, I want to ask you a bit about that. I mean, you're one of the loudest voices speaking out against Hindu nationalism. That has come at a price for you, especially during a time where female journalists in different countries, not just India, face high levels of online violence, which could also spill into physical violence offline. Now, how do you deal with all of that, Rana?
It's this thing. I once did a test. I just put a full stop on Twitter to see how do people react, and there were like 1,000 replies saying jihadi Jane, blah blah blah. So it's like I don't think they really care about what I say. It's about the idea that I say something, the idea that I'm a woman, I'm a Muslim woman at that, who's asserting her identity. It's not palatable for them. It's like they always expect somebody to speak on behalf of me, and that I think that's something which we are also seeing in Palestine. A lot of people expect to speak on your behalf and not let you speak about your own lived experience. And the moment you speak about your own lived experience, it becomes a bit of a threat to everybody, right? I don't think they were used to people asserting their faith. I think that is a big problem for the right wing trolls. They expect you to be subservient because they view India as a Hindu nationalist state. So anybody else who is allowed to stay here must stay within the boundaries that they have created for me, or effectively for Muslims. So if we must assert ourselves, then we must be silenced. So I think in my case, most certainly, if I see the abuse targeted at me, it's very gendered. It's very communal. It's always laced with words like jihadi Jane or ISIS sex slave, which means it is my religion plays an important role in the kind of hatred that I get. The other thing that they do is to kind of discredit me. So, when you have a voice that can't be discredited with, I have multiple cases that I'm fighting right now. In fact, when the elections began, I mean, 3 weeks ago, I have received multiple notices. Um, when they can't, in a way, silence you with intimidation tactics, I think they try to wear you down with online threats or with online abuse. So sometimes you do because you're human and you kind of do take a step back saying, I'm not ready for this. You kind of shut down your replies and you kind of censor yourself. You start self-censoring yourself as a result. And I think that's what they want eventually. And that's when you realize, no, I have to bounce back and keep speaking my truth.
One story I think of is the story of Gauri Lankesh, who was your friend and colleague, and she was tragically killed in 2017. But what struck me from that story is that she used to tell you to not pay attention to these online threats, to not really think about them too much because they're online and whatnot. Now, the tragic killing of her, did that change the way you go about your daily life?
I think Gauri's murder came as a shock because it's like she herself didn't realize it's going to get this serious. Or somebody could just take her life, or people hated her so much for her work that they would actually take her life. And in fact, she translated my book Gujarat Files in the regional language. And I think she would keep pursuing me on Facebook inbox saying, I've sent you the contract, please sign it, let's do the book launch. And I just wrote on my Facebook that I was getting a lot of online harassment and abuse. And she said, babe, these are nincompoops, these are paper tigers. And 2 days later, she was shot dead. And I just didn't know how to address that, because here is a woman who actually thought that these people are not serious enough. And on various levels, it was scary. It was scary because she was killed in Bangalore, which is a metropolitan city. It's not like it's one of those Mufassal areas or a backward village in India. It was a mainstream city, a cosmopolitan city in the country. And for her to be shot dead right outside her house, until today, her killers had a trial not having begun, I think it's a dangerous precedence for everybody. Gauri's murder should have been a wake-up call, but unfortunately, India has fallen to the 161st position in the World Press Freedom Index. Now, if journalists are not being killed, they are being incarcerated and thrown behind bars, and they are being intimidated with multiple cases. Gauri was a warning sign, and I think Gauri Lankesh's death or murder was the biggest reminder of the direction in which the Indian democracy was heading to, and the direction in which the Indian media was heading to.
And these threats and attacks against you, I mean, they've become quite famous because of the fact that they've been picked up by international media. But how do you believe your journalism and your journalistic work has evolved in light of these threats and in light of these attacks?
If you were to ask me this question probably 6 months ago, I would say that it has not impacted me. Probably even as recently.
You would say no.
I would say no, it has not impacted. It is a deterrence in the sense that it does affect me because I'm a human and I do get rattled by the kind of threats that I do get. But over the last 6 months, because they have also been coupled with court summons and income tax notices and other notices, what it does, it takes away your it has a big impact on your emotional health. So
Yeah.
if, for instance, I'm spending more time in courts and investigating agencies, by the time I come back to work, I have lost the motivation to report on that particular day because I'm so exhausted. I'm physically and emotionally exhausted. All right. I'm spending more time with my lawyers than I'm with my reports. And that takes a toll on your mental and emotional health. And I think, in India, we have seen, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, there was raid on NewsClick, which is its independent journalism organization, where in the morning, close to 40 journalists had their houses raided. So when journalists are treated as the enemy of the state, and when you are made as the enemy of the state, it does take away, and you wonder if you made the right choice. It does. That question does come into being, but then
right choice with what, Rana? With being a journalist, or what do you mean when you say right choice?
Being a journalist and speaking without fear, speaking fearlessly. And it's not like I will not be a martyr and say, oh, I'm not, it doesn't rattle me. Of late, it has been, because earlier I used to believe that, okay, there are democratic institutions that will protect me. even if the worst of impulses were to take upon people. But when you see the democratic institutions crumbling, you wonder which agency will give you justice. If the government is trying to intimidate you, who's going to give you justice? And that lack of faith in the institutions makes it worse. So these are the sacrifices that you have made and your family has made, and some days you wonder if these sacrifices are worth it. But then you also take solace in the fact that, when history is being written, at least I would have made my contribution in, as my work will be one of the documents in history, and that gives me solace.
Right. And what about your critics? I mean, what do you say to them? Some of your critics say that, your journalism and your personal story have become one. That your journalism is being driven by your personal story, and therefore it's weakening the objective aspect of it. I mean, what do you say to them?
I would never ever talk about, it's not me who has made it personal, it's the government that has made it personal. So if the government tries to set me up as an example, right? If the government files multiple cases against me, if the government makes me the story, then I have to react. I have to respond. And it is my right to respond. If the government has made me the enemy of the state, then I will have to respond. If the agencies send me notices after notices just on eve of elections, what am I supposed to do? And for the longest time, I've stayed silent. If I have, there is ICJ research that I am attacked online every 6 seconds. If the death threats and the rape threats against me are so explicit and nobody's trying to help me, and if I'm trying to speak for it, it's like, I don't understand who else will speak for me if I do not. So I don't think I have made my story personal. I think it's the government which has tried to make me the story. In an ideal world, I would just do my journalism. In an ideal world, I would just talk about the oppressed and the marginalized and not talk about myself. But if you have made me the story, and if you're trying to intimidate me, then I'll speak about myself because nobody else will.
I just have a few more questions before we wrap up. Going back to in the elections, it's widely expected that Modi will win a third term, possibly even with an increased majority. Now, what fears do you have with that outcome?
I think what Prime Minister Modi's speech, when he spoke about Muslims as infiltrators and the Congress would be giving them what rightfully belongs to the Hindus, what he has done is it is not just an attempt to win the election. It is also an attempt to tell us what the third Modi term will look like. It's going to be more brazen. It will have a brazen disregard for all the world and all the human rights organizations in the world which are critical of him. Not that Mr. Modi has shown any regard for human rights agencies in the last 10 years. Amnesty has been thrown out of India. Cases have been registered against Amnesty every time, whether it's Freedom House or all the indices which criticize India, the government latches at them. The mainstream media has collapsed. I feel that next year is the centenary celebrations of the RSS. And I feel that Mr. Modi's gift to them will be a democracy which will effectively be a Hindu state. And that's my biggest fear. A democracy in which the institutions would have been paralyzed. A democracy in which people will be only largely subjected to propaganda, state propaganda. A democracy in which elections will be a farce here on. A democracy in which opposition leaders will be incarcerated, jailed, journalists will be treated as enemies of the states, minorities will be second-class citizens. I personally believe, and I could be wrong, that a third term for Modi is inevitable. I don't see any wave of change happening right now because I'm a journalist who's on the ground and who's talking to people. And there are people who tell me that they might have lost their jobs. By the end of the day, Modi gave them a Ram temple. I meet those kind of people as well. So I fear that this democracy that we once took great pride in, the land of Gandhi, the land of democracy, the world's greatest democracy, and Modi calls it the mother of democracy. It will just be a democracy on paper, and the elections that we are going to have here on will be a rubber stamp election. And the worst part is that the world will not be able to do anything about it because the world needs India as a bulwark against China. It needs its support in Russia. So it is allowing Modi to get away with almost every violation that he will do or he plans to in the next couple of years of his third term.
When you say democracy on paper, I mean, do you believe that India is the world's largest democracy, as it's always dubbed in the media?
India, see, Modi is not India for me. What the Modi government has done, in fact, India is a democracy. It is Modi who has tried to make it a Hindu country. So I'm not going to conflate Modi with India, because that's exactly what he wants. He wants Modi to be India and India to be Modi. If you see any criticism, when we criticize Modi at international platforms, the headlines on news channels will be, this person criticizes India. Where, for instance, when there was this investigation on the Adani Group, the Hindenburg investigation, news channels said Soros-backed investigation attacks India. So I think Modi has nothing to do with democracy. Indian democracy, uh, India with all it's not like a perfect democracy. It had its own flaws, and that's a different discussion altogether, right? That the democratic institutions that were meant to protect the marginalized and privileged, they did not just overnight become these organizations that, even before the BJP came into power, they were prejudiced towards the minorities and all kinds of minorities. They were prejudiced towards Kashmiris. They were prejudiced towards the backward caste. So it's not like the Indian democracy was the perfect example of a democratic country. But with the Modi government in power, the semblance of democracy that we had, a functional democracy, that has crumbled, and that I think is going to be detrimental for the Indian people, because on paper, for the world, when Modi goes to the UN, he will bow before the Mahatma's bust. He will go to the White House as a state guest and repeat the word democracy like in a loop. But at the end of the day, he will come back and his supporters will worship Nathuram Godse, the assassin of Mahatma Gandhi. So, there will always be this element of, okay, yes, we are a democracy, although it's completely hollowed out.
My last question for you, Rana. I mean, as you know, Modi hasn't had a press conference, a news press conference, since becoming prime minister in 2014. Now, I know you've met him before. He was the prime minister. But do you ever think about the opportunity of interviewing Modi today? I mean, what kind of questions would you ask him? Do you ever think about that?
See, the thing is, I've never asked him. I have never thought of the questions that I'm going to ask Modi, because the idea that he's going to entertain somebody like me, or for that matter any other journalist, is an idea that only exists in imagination. So I'm not
well,
going
yeah,
to have,
let's imagine it.
probably, I think, well, there's so many questions, and I think I'm going to be very bitter when I ask him that question. But the questions will range from the 2002 Gujarat riots. The questions will range from, why would his government sanction the release of Bilkis Bano's rapists? The Bilkis Bano was the face of the Gujarat genocide, who was gang raped by multiple men, and her rapists were released on the 75th year of Indian independence. What does he have to think of? What does he have to say about it, considering he calls himself a man who wants to protect the women of the country, that he considers them his sisters and mothers? What does he think about Bilkis Bano? What does he think about the woman who is still struggling for justice? What does he think about those who are lynched on the streets of the country? And there are too many, actually. I think I have to think about it if I have to frame it. But the thing is, there's so many questions that one needs to ask of Modi. And one did. I mean, the journalist who asked Mr. Modi the question about the attack on minorities, and in his response, he used the word democracy some 27 times. So I know whatever I ask, that the answer is going to be democracy, which is going to be such a farce. But probably I'm going to ask him about the farce called Indian democracy.
And if you allow me just one last, again,
Sure.
I know I said last question, but just one more question, Rana. I mean, what's next for you in your work? I mean, how do you see yourself in this space that you have? Where do you go from here?
I honestly, as long as I have no ambitions, as long as I just get to tell the story of people, I think that has become a big task, that the platforms to speak or tell our stories are shrinking. Um, you know, I think that for me is a bigger challenge, is to find a platform to tell the story about India. And also, I think the challenge is to reinvent yourself in the way you tell the story. Now, I have been telling the story about India, the decline of the Indian democracy. Probably sometimes I feel like I'm repeating myself in every column that I write, because the stakeholders are the same set of people. the challenge to reach a wider audience, and thanks to social media, I think, and that's exactly what we see with journalists in Gaza, that it has social media has in a way amplified their voices. I think the challenge would be to kind of make yourself is to get a young generation of India, get them the ideas of how to remind them of the democracy that we once were. I do intend to write a book on India, about which runs parallel to my own journey as an Indian, as an Indian Muslim, as an Indian journalist. I do intend to write that book, but I think the only way that I can write the book is when I get some um, bandwidth or headspace to write it, when I'm not fighting cases. So I hope that I do find the headspace to write the India book that I've been wanting to write for a while. And I do really, really want to do something for journalists in India, the young independent journalists. I feel like as a journalist who is in the public eye, who has her own set of privileges, I feel like I'm duty bound to do something for them. And that is something I really, really want to, I want to platform them in some way or the other. I want to bring their voices to the mainstream.
And on that note, Rana Ayyub, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today. I appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
on.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Great talking.